All right, thank you. We have our board of directors meeting for January 13th, 2002. As noted earlier, we are in a series of meetings today. We've had a pledge of allegiance early on, so let us begin with the roll call.
Directors Sethi,
Here.
Akbari,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Huang, here, and Weed.
Here. As I just mentioned, without objection, we will pass over the salute to the flag. I would like to take a moment, though, in opening the meeting for a moment of silence in memory of BJ Bunting, extraordinary friend of our district, one who was one of the low points in the history of the district was the treatment of the Bunting, Mr. Bunting and his family some years ago. And it's something hopefully we can learn a lesson from. He was a good friend. So if you can bear with me for 30 seconds of silence in memory of BJ Bunting. Thank you. I will be adjourning the meeting in memory of BJ. So at this time we have public comments. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to address the board on items which are on our not on our agenda? I see no member of the public, so let us then close public comments and move on to the agenda. Is there any items that we would like to add to the consent calendar? And I'd note item 5.8 and 5.9, excuse me, 5.9 and 5.10 could not be on that edition.
Excuse me to interrupt, President Weed. I know that this is the third public meeting this evening, but we do have additional members of the public who have joined us. So if you don't mind, I'd like to make some just initial housekeeping remarks, and then we can move on to.
Oh, please. I thank you.
Thank you. And so good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this board meeting. My name is Ed Stevenson, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this public meeting either by using the Zoom application or by telephone. If you are participating by Zoom, we ask that you mute your microphone unless you're speaking. You may also be placed on mute by the Assistant District Secretary. The Assistant District Secretary will unmute participants at the appropriate times when the board is receiving public comments. In Zoom, you'll be able to view the presentation materials as they're presented to the board. At any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in the Zoom app, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. If you are participating by telephone audio, again, we ask that you put your phone on mute, and you may view the presentation materials and staff reports, which have all been posted to the website at acwd.org, and you can follow along that way. This Zoom webinar is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. The board will be working through a full agenda this evening, including 2 closed session items that will be covered near the end of the meeting. While the board convenes privately in closed session, members of the public may remain logged onto Zoom or stay on the phone to be informed of board reports once the closed sessions are concluded. Again, thank you for attending, and that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Well, thank you. Again, an opportunity for members of the public to comment to the board. There being none, let us then move to the consent calendar. Is there a desire to put items on the, add additional items to the consent calendar?
President Weed, I have a conflict of interest on item 5.10, where I need to recuse myself from the meeting. I have a family in development interest in the property located at 2950 Washington Boulevard. which is going through the city right now of Fremont. And so it's within 1,000 feet of the Middlefield Reservoir, which is one of the assignments for this authorization of professional services agreement. And so on that one item, I will ask Marianne to put me in the doghouse and remove me from the meeting.
Thank you. I have an issue with item 5.9, which I'll explain at the point where 5.9 comes up. But I would ask, is there a motion to add items 5.1 to
I will-
5.8 to the consent calendar?
I will make the motion to add items 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, 5.6, 5.7, and 5.8 to the consent calendar, please.
I will second the motion.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Director Sethi,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang. Aye. And Weed.
Aye. Item 5.9.
I will make the motion to adopt the consent calendar as amended.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Directors Sethi,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang. Aye. And Weed.
Aye. Item 5.9, as I commented earlier, is one I will be abstaining on. It does not require, I believe, my recusal from the meeting. It's an issue that I have abstained on each of the votes due to involvement on the overall fish ladder projects. So, but I will let me continue the meeting, but my vote will be an abstention. At this time, do we have any staff input on 5.9?
President Weed, we'd be happy to read the staff report. This is a relatively straightforward change order for the Rubber Dam #1 fish ladder project. It involves a number of items of work, including work that has to be delayed as a result of the acquisition of a davit crane, and that would require an extension of the contract, the number of days in the contract. So we'd be happy to read the item or go directly to staff recommendation.
Why don't you issue the staff recommendation? It's been an item that's been before the board many times, so move to the, do we have?
I'll make the motion to adopt staff recommendation.
I can read staff recommendation just briefly, and you're right, this is change order number 12. So we have seen this project many times. If it's okay with the board, I'll just read that the recommendation is by motion 1, grant a time extension of 180 calendar days solely for the installation of a davit crane and pedestal, and 2, approve change order number 12 in the amount of $295,809.04 to Flatiron West Incorporated for the Rubber Dam #1 Alameda County Drop Structure Fishway, 31 control building modifications and Shin Pond Fish Screens construction project jobs 21006, 21012, and 21019. Thank you.
So do we have a motion, Director Akbari?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Do we have any comment? Roll call, please.
Director Sethi,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang. Aye. And Weed.
Abstain. Item 5.10 is one where Director Sethi has requested to be recused. So at this point, I think you're asked the moderator of the Zoom site to, Director Sethi has been removed from our meeting for the moment. And this is an authorization for professional service agreement for ground survey monitoring for district facilities and other services. I believe we can go just directly to the, since it was on the consent calendar, go and absent desire to go into more detail, go directly to the staff report recommendation.
Thank you, President Weed. And I'll just ask Ms. Sue if she can confirm for the record that Director Sethi is outside the meeting at the moment.
Yes, Director Sethi is in a breakout room.
Thank you. Staff's recommendation here is by motion, authorize the general manager to execute a professional services agreement with Sandus for a base term of 18 months and an amount not to exceed $86,480 for ground monitoring survey of district facilities and for survey associated with the new aquifer reclamation well project, jobs 6345 and 21034. And number 2, authorize the general manager to exercise up to 3 one-year option terms in an additional amount not to exceed $155,018.66 for a total sum of $241,498.66 for survey services associated with the ground monitoring survey of district facilities, job 6345.
Thank you. If there's any comment from the board or from the public, I see none. Motion, please.
I'll move staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. A roll call, please.
Directors Sethi, Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Wong,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Thank you. Next is item 5.11, authorization of agreement for PFAS treatment study at groundwater facilities. Staff?
Thank you, President Weed. It's an important topic, and I'll turn it over to our Director of Operations and Maintenance, Kurt Ahrens, to introduce this item.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. President Weed, members of the board. The district began a voluntary PFAS monitoring program in June of 2020 to ensure the water quality of water being delivered to our customers. Because of the low levels of PFAS found in some of our groundwater wells, we've had to modify our operations at our blending facility. This has reduced the production capacity of the facility as well as increased our costs. This project before you tonight we'll be presenting is intended to restore that lost capacity. Staff has a brief presentation which will review some background information about PFAS and provide a summary of the proposed work. And with that, I would like to introduce Mr. Ranga Sampith, Environmental Engineer in our production division, who will be assisted tonight by Mr. Mike Whitcomb, our Production Manager. And with that, Mr. Sampith.
Thank you, Mr. Ahrens. Members of the board and staff, I will share my screen now. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Good evening, members of the board and staff. Tonight, I would like to present portions with Mr. Mike Wickham, Water Production Manager, about seeking an authorization for a PFAS treatment study at our largest groundwater facility, the blending facility. I will go over the background information on what are PFAS, and they are not regulated constituents of concern yet, but there is a lot of regulation coming our way, both from the federal EPA and the State Division of Drinking Water. So I will go over the regulatory overview and the roadmap. And to stay ahead of upcoming regulations, ACWD embarked on a voluntary monitoring program last year. So I will discuss the results of the monitoring program. And then Mr. Wickham will talk about the operational strategy, what we have implemented at the blending facility for PFAS control and how that has led to, like Mr. Ahrens pointed out, a reduction in the output from the blending facility. And to catch up with the lost capacity again, we have the treatment plan for PFAS at the blending facility. So Mr. Wickham will talk about what the goals of that project are, what is the approach we would like to take, and the final recommendation to the board tonight. What are PFAS? PFAS are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are basically fluorinated compounds. They have some wonderful properties in terms of being resistant to heat, repelling oil and water. And they are all synthetic, meaning man-made chemicals. They are widely occurring. They were manufactured in the United States for many, many years. So they have now been phased out in the United States, but could be present in any imported products. But just the entire gamut of the usage, anywhere from stain-resistant carpets, non-stick cookware, fast food packaging, personal products, firefighting foam, the use across people's lives for PFAS is wide, as we can see here. And they are very, they do not break down. That's why they are kind of referred to as forever chemicals. They do not biodegrade and they tend to linger in the environment. In terms of the regulatory overview, so the state of California, so PFOA, PFOS, and PFBS that you see here, perfluorooctanoic acid, perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, and perfluorobutane sulfonic acid. These are three amongst the over 6,000 PFAS compounds that are out there. And these are the most widely used compounds, hence the first set of analysis or the focus, if you will, are on these. And the state of California has established the notification levels and the response levels. These are long-term health-based thresholds, but they are the precursors, if you will, to an evolving process of ultimately the maximum contaminant levels, MCLs. So a notification level essentially means a long-term health protective goal that is set, and the response level essentially means a fairly high level where the water system or the source has to be taken out of service and looked into. And if there is an exceedance of a notification level of any of these PFOA, PFOS, or PFBS, and I will talk about those levels in a couple of slides, then there is an obligation for the water system to notify the cities they serve and also the county authorities. On the federal side, we have had the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule number 3, where there were only 6 compounds that could be analyzed using analytical methods, and we monitored, and all the levels were below the detection limits for reporting at that time. Now, the EPA has published a roadmap in terms of strategizing and prioritizing PFAS treatment and identification of various sources. So what's coming up next from the federal EPA side is the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, UCMR 5. With evolving analytical chemistry, currently the state of California and the federal EPA follow an analytical method which can detect up to 18 PFAS compounds. But what's coming in the future is UCMR 5. We will have up to 29 PFAS compounds will be monitored, and the sampling is scheduled for sometime between 2023 and 2025. The federal EPA roadmap also talks about drinking water standards for PFOA and PFOS. They are expected to be established in 2023. And then following that, the next year, we could expect the maximum contaminant levels expected to be established by the state of California in 2024. Based on what we currently know, the MCLs could be almost the same levels as the notification levels for these constituents, or perhaps lower. So in light of upcoming regulations, ACWD did not receive any monitoring orders from either from any state agency. But nevertheless, given the prevalence of these compounds and their forever presence in nature, we embarked on a voluntary monitoring program in June, and we have been sampling all the sources: the Maury and the PT well fields, the desal supply wells. We also collect samples of purchased SFPUC water, and then to make sure that the public is not receiving anything exceeding the notification levels, we have also been monitoring the distribution system entry point from all the facilities. And we have also been collecting annual samples at TP2, raw water, and finished water. And then all results have been posted on ACWD website. We have a PFOA, PFOS, and PFBS on the website tabulated, which I'm also going to present for the blending facility now. And also we have all the 18 chemicals of concern posted on the ACWD website. The good news is we have through operational strategies, which Mr. Wickham will touch upon, we have maintained all detections below notification levels at entry points to the distribution system by implementing operating strategies. And the direct result of that is there has been a reduction in the output from the blending facility, and we would like to catch up that capacity. Here's a summary of the results. This is 6 quarters worth of monitoring, and we are continuing the quarterly monitoring. But as you can see, the notification levels, which I mentioned, now the world of PFAS tends to go down to the parts per trillion range, not the parts per billion, but further down parts per trillion range. Notification levels for these are fairly low. As you can see, for PFAS, it's 6.5. For PFOA, it's 5.1. For PFBS, it's 500. The takeaway here is the Maury wells, we've had detections between 10 to 14. And then the average is the running average of the last 4 quarters between 12 and 14, so exceeding the notification levels. And then in the PT well field, also we've had detections exceeding the notification levels. Maury 2 being a deep well, we have not had any detections, which is good news of any PFAS compounds. But once again, another good news is we have always managed to have the levels that is in the entry points of the distribution system. For example, S1 is the entry point of the distribution system. From the blending facility, the levels have always remained below the notification levels. And as you can see, the response levels are much higher, and we are nowhere close to that. But there were some operational strategies which had to be implemented. We have in terms of blending and in terms of rotating the wells, so which kind of reduced the blending facilities capacity. And this project aims to implement a treatment system so that that reduced capacity can be brought up back online. With that, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Wickham, who will discuss the strategy and the project.
Would you entertain any questions at this point?
Sure. Sure.
Please, let me, yeah, thank you. I think it's a good idea. I had some questions myself. Director Sethi?
Yeah, if you can just back up to the previous slide.
Sure. Mr. Wickham, can I give you control after the questions?
Of course.
Thank you.
So
Yes.
now I was looking for the slide where you had the statistics on the blending facility. There,
Oh,
right
thank
there.
you.
Okay, so you said earlier in the presentation that you were also doing samples on the raw and finished water out of TP2, but I
Yes.
don't see the results here on this slide.
Yes. So the reason is because, as you can see here, we've got all the wells primarily serving the blending facility with PFAS concentrations. The focus of this treatment system, the blending facility, which has lost capacity by adopting certain strategies, that's why we have presented the results here. However, Director Sethi, we did not detect any PFAS compounds in the surface water from TP2. Also, based on our experience and talking to other agencies, PFAS usually is more prevalent, if you will, in groundwater systems and not as much as in surface water systems. But the focus of this treatment system is going to be the blending facility, and that is why for the board, we have presented only the blending facility well results.
Something I've been interested in for a while is, in respect to TP2, is we use certain hydrocarbon-based chemicals and compounds in achieving, our finished water. And I'm wondering if there are any of those compounds detected in the finished water, the chemicals that we use to process the water, clean the water, whether it actually, if there's any element of those hydrocarbon-based chemicals that end up in the finished water.
I am not sure, Mr. Wickham or Ms. Pena, can you?
Sorry, Director Sethi, we can, we don't, the hydrocarbon chemicals that we use there are mostly in the solids, well, they are in the solids processing. And there have been detections in the solids, but not in the treated water, in the finished water.
Okay, that is my particular question here. So thank you.
Do other board members have questions on the presentation?
I have one, this is actually a committee, but I kind of came up with this tonight is, do we have any indication of what Union sanitary discharge PFAS levels are? I mean, this stuff's in everything. I have, some feelings about testing stuff down, and I mentioned this before, parts per trillion, when this stuff is everywhere. No indications of the absorption factor, no indications of inhalation factors, and we're just targeting water at parts per trillion. However, if we were to decide at some point in the future to, let's say, try to use some form of a reused water, is there any data, do we know of any data out there for what comes out of, let's say, a sewer treatment plant and goes through, let's say, a facility similar to where some of these are actually in operation down south? Just a question, just a thought.
I have been in some discussions where there is a lot of focus, Director Gunther, on wastewater treatment plants and the discharges, but I'm not aware of anything particular with regards to USD. But I know for the wastewater treatment plants, the discussion was this monitoring for PFAS, particularly as you can see, the 18 and the 29, it just keeps growing. Is a huge concern to them. So they are on the radar, but I don't know specifically with regards to USD if there's any information out there.
I have a follow-up question, if I could here, please. I'm sorry to press on this issue, but I was informed by a member of our staff some years ago that we do not test for hydrocarbons in the finished water that goes into our distribution system from TP2. And so I want to ask a very straight question. Do we test for hydrocarbons in the finished water supply?
For hydrocarbons, I'm not sure. I have to defer that to.
I'll say there, and I'll ask for Mr. Aaron's support here, but in terms of regulated contaminants and so forth, that's where the majority of the testing is done. The chemicals that are used in water treatment include ferric chloride, it's not a hydrocarbon, and some long chain polymers that are designed to come out into the solid stream of the water treatment process. In terms of other monitoring that we do for hydrocarbons, we do report the key testing that we do in our annual water quality report. And so I know that Mr. Ahrens is reviewing that at the moment. And I'd ask that he chime in on whether or not that's part of our testing.
Well, I was informed that we do not test for the hydrocarbons in the finished water because it is not required by the state of California or the federal government. But I'm particularly interested in, regardless of what the law is, whether we do in fact test for those constituents in the finished water.
Yeah, we do test for a fair amount of additional constituents beyond what's required from a regulatory standpoint, but I'll ask Mr. Ahrens to elaborate.
Yeah, I say it's not one of the required reporting under our water quality report. What I would offer is let me research that, and since you're now on the water quality committee, we can bring that back as a report to that committee and provide some more detail about our testing and hydrocarbons specifically, if that works.
Thank you. I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Other members of the board have questions or comments? And let me raise several. On the Union Sanitary District discharge, I would encourage us to start monitoring any specific information. We have in our proposal to spend a great deal of money on a recycled water project in future years. And if it cannot address the PFAS, that may change our entire capital expenditure program significantly. So that information, I think, is important to get and monitor. Next, the desal plant, which uses groundwater. Do we have any information or data on the water going into the desal plant in Newark?
Yes, Director Weed. So like I mentioned on this slide, we have the desal supply wells, and the PFAS concentrations are not very much varying across the basin. But to answer your question, the desal supply wells also have in the parts per trillion range, kind of in this range. But the good news is RO takes everything out. So the entry point of distribution that's being served to the customers from the desal plant is also a non-detect. But yes, we do have data for the desal supply wells also.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Next, we have on the scope of the concern. You mentioned 6,000 compounds. I've heard as high as 18,000 compounds have been noted that may be of concern. And we're now only monitoring 6 going to 29, and I'm told that they have the technology now to monitor at least 64. Do we have any feeling of where this is going and what the cost of monitoring is? The cost based on if it's by compound, is it an additional cost for every compound and every measurement?
So to answer your first question, these compounds, as you saw, the whole spectrum is in the parts per trillion range, and which we all know is very low. But the current method that the EPA and the State Division of Drinking Water has adopted analyzes up to 18, which we have been doing. And then the UCMR5, like I mentioned, is the next EPA method as part of it, which will go up to 29. And there are studies out there being done, and I know that there is the Department of Defense, where a lot of those sites, there have been detections of PFAS, obviously because of suppression agents and whatnot. They can do, there is a modified method that's not adopted yet, but it can do up to 40 is what I know. Second, in terms of cost, we don't know what the future analytical costs are going to be, but it's not like, and also the PFAS are what we call the long chain and the short chain compound. So as the analytical chemistry evolves over these, I'm sure there's going to be more and more, but at the same time, on the health effects side of things, what's driving, for example, PFOA, PFOS, and PFBS, why are these getting notification levels? Why are not the others? The Division of Drinking Water is working with the OEHA, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, to establish those goals for another 7 PFAS. So as we keep moving, this thing is like a moving target. More and more will get added to this bucket. But we only know the current costs, which are not an exact number, but I know that the analytical cost for a PFAS analysis by the EPA method 537.1 is roughly $300 to $400 per sample. Would it increase? I don't know.
Okay. Is it fair to say that reverse osmosis as a treatment, or whether other treatments will universally clear up all of the PFOS and PFABs that we're aware of?
As of now, Mr. Wickham will touch upon some of the technologies and what we plan on implementing. But yes, reverse osmosis has demonstrated good, excellent promise in taking these out. And then we also have other technologies, granular activated carbon that has been there for treating volatile organic compounds for a long time, or petroleum hydrocarbons. There is ion exchange, which is proven very much with organic chemicals, which also take PFAS out. So there are all these technologies, but yes, RO is also one of the technologies that's very effective.
All right. Given the information we have and the unknown cost, which is already high and going to only get extreme potentially, does it really matter what the water supply is showing, or all this detail, if we're going to have to treat it anyway? And the emphasis should be the assumption that we, once we've hit that critical stage, which we may have already reached, that we have to go into an advanced treatment, and we spend our time measuring the effluent, not the influent, into the treatment facility.
So to answer that question, so we have been monitoring quarterly. So we do know with some reasonable confidence, as you saw it, where it is between 10 and 14 parts per trillion, not in the hundreds parts per trillion. So if there are several options on the table, we could reduce the source monitoring perhaps and focus more on, what the treatment effluent is putting out and what's going into the treatment system. Those are options that once we start this treatment study, and then we are going to look at the monitoring side of things and then see how we can implement some of those strategies that you mentioned. Yeah.
Well, then to reiterate the question, shouldn't the study, rather than going into great detail on individual components and measurements and wells, identify that we've hit a threshold and just say we're there, and now start working on the treatment process and the effluent?
Director, I just to say, if I can, maybe we can finish what the proposal is. I think this is a good discussion to have because it does fit into the bigger picture. But we're kind of jumping to the solutions. So maybe staff can just finish, laying out what this project's about for the rest of the board and the public, and then we can have a discussion about whether we, go down this path or maybe change paths and and approach it differently. I think it's a valid question.
Fine. Then let me on this chart. We have one well which has non-detect. Comes from a deep aquifer. Does the study give us an opportunity to look at being able to tap into the non-detect aquifer and to meet our water supplies, as opposed to a treatment solution?
At this point, no. The study gives us the flexibility of using any of those MODIFIES and the PTs at varied capacities or even optimal capacity, but to catch up with that production, because Mr. Wickham will talk about production capacities. I don't want to steal the thunder from him, but our goal for now is come up with a treatment system that will basically help us use these wells that they are optimally designed for, roughly in the 2000 to 2200 GPM range. That way we have a facility that can get back into production and with the treatment system. So to answer your question, currently there's no focus as part of this study, at least from water production side, looking at deeper aquifers. But what we know from the monitoring is the Maury 2, which is a deep aquifer well, has not been impacted with PFAS.
Okay.
I will add though that we do have a team looking at additional wells in the deep aquifer. It's seen as a long-term option or proposal, not to replace this, but just from a long-term water supply. Right now, there's a lot of unknowns as to what that would do to the aquifer. And then we don't know if PFAS will eventually show up in the deep aquifer. Maybe it's just not there yet, or we could pull it into the deep aquifer. There's lots of questions about that. So we actually have money in the budget to explore that, but it's not seen as an alternative to treating the other water. It's just seen as an additional resource of managing the groundwater basin.
Next question. There are other contaminants of concern, including, we understand we found trace elements of MTBE in the above the fault aquifer well field. Would those be appropriate to include in this overall study?
The MTB level, in fact, when we did the proposal and when we were looking at, the best available technologies and all that, MTB as of now, what we know, Director Weed, is J flag to begin with, and those detections are very, very low, that I don't think it's going to influence, if you will, any of the treatment strategies that are there for PFAS. But of course, as part of the study, there are other competitors, if you will, for particularly ion exchange or anything that will all be looked at. So the first order of business with regards to this treatability study will be a bench scale study. But we are going to look at, even though MTBE is not a concern at the levels we have, but the water quality analysis will determine if there are any other competing constituents for the treatment system.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions to the board on the first presentation? Let's return to staff and continue the second presentation.
Thank you.
And
So-
I'm sorry, Mike. I just wanted to mention one thing for the public, because we've used a lot of technical terms, talked about chemicals, we've talked about treatment systems, and some of this may be kind of out of context. But just to confirm for the public, there are no detectable levels of PFAS or other issues from a water quality standpoint being generated by our desalination facility, by water treatment plant number 2. These were all discussed. And in all of our water production and all of the water that's put into our system and served to our customers is below any sort of current level of concern or regulatory level. And so I just wanted to kind of quickly mention that, because there was a lot of discussion about different levels and different types of constituents in the water. So with that, you can move forward.
Thank you, sir. So yes, our goal is to ensure that none of our customers receive water with PFAS levels exceeding the notification levels. And as you saw from the earlier results, monitoring results slide on the blending facility, the majority of our wells there have PFAS at approximately twice the notification level. So our operating strategy to address that includes a higher blend ratio of purchased San Francisco Public Utilities Commission water used at our blending facility. We're blending at a ratio of approximately, we're a little greater than 50% San Francisco use at the blending facility as our strategy to control our PFAS levels. It has resulted in increased SFPUC water use, and also it's resulted in lower hardness from the blending facilities. That's good. But like Mr. Sampath had mentioned, Mr. Ahrens as well, it's also resulted in a reduction in operating capacity at the blending facility. So most of you probably remember when we operate the blending facility to control only hardness, that facility rate is approximately 34, maximum rate is approximately 34 to 36 million gallons per day of water production, and still able to meet the hardness targets. When we operate that facility to control for PFAS, the facility rate maximum drops to between 22 to 24 million gallons a day as the most we can reliably do out of that facility and still control the PFAS levels. So having the lowered facility rate does reduce our capacity to meet system demands and operational flexibility, particularly in the summer months, because the blending facility is our highest production facility. So to address that, we began this project, and this project has 3 goals. The first is to identify a PFAS treatment system to treat up to 6 million gallons a day for PFAS at the blending facility. Now we chose that 6 million gallon a day target as the goal because that amount of water being treated to be PFAS free would restore our blending facility capacities to those that they were per our pre-discovery of PFAS in our wells. Another goal is to implement this treatment system, if feasible, by summer of 2023. Again, the summer is the most challenging time of year for us as far as production capacity. Also, another goal is to minimize the opportunity for stranded assets. So whatever approach we choose, we want it to be consistent with the long-term goals of the property. The project scope includes reviewing water quality and site data to identify potential treatment alternatives for PFAS. Did I skip a slide? No. And that's going to include the bench scale testing for the treatment selection, because there are a couple of different alternatives we could go with. It's going to evaluate alternatives and design a 6 million gallon a day PFAS treatment system. And that would include providing permitting assistance, environmental assistance, and procurement, construction, and commissioning assistance once the treatment alternative is identified. And then also the scope includes identifying alternatives and providing cost estimates for potential future treatment systems. That would include potential treatments that we want, potential treatment facilities that we may want there in the future for different purposes other than treating PFAS only. So we put out an RFP for a study, and we received 4 responses, and all of them shared some common themes. All of the RFPs were recommending essentially centralized pressure vessel treatment system to address our concerns. And they all were also recommending to pursue a parallel path in order to meet the project schedule goals. So the project approach, our approach for this project really includes an accelerated schedule to store production. And the schedule is really a driver on this project due to the levels of PFAS we have in our wells and the regulatory timelines that Mr. Sampath kind of had shared in the earlier slides. We are expecting regulation of these chemicals at the federal level in late 2023, and we're currently projecting them to be in place at the state level as well in 2024. So once those regulations are established, then well, if they're established at levels above that in our groundwater basin, which we feel they may be, we're going to be in a position where we need to act on that. So to meet the schedule, the approach includes a parallel path. That would be beginning the treatment system and the treatment vessel design in parallel with the water quality analysis and bench scale testing. There are long lead times for some of the components in these treatment systems, including vessels. So pursuing a parallel path provides the most realistic opportunity to meet the schedule goals. So regarding treatment technologies, the most efficient PFAS only treatment technologies are really granular activated carbon and ion exchange. Reverse osmosis is also a very effective treatment for PFAS removal as well as other contaminants, but it's more costly and complex implementation. So both the granular activated carbon and the ion exchange technologies utilize pressure vessel contact systems. And those pressure vessel systems can be designed for either media, whether it's granular activated carbon or ion exchange, as determined by our water quality analysis and testing. And a system like that could also be expanded or repurposed for future use, which would be, including being repurposed to serve as some component of a larger other treatment system in the future. So, and this is the project schedule that we're looking for with this project. So as you can see, it's a very aggressive schedule. It pretty much begins shortly after award in February of this year with the water quality evaluation and preliminary design work with the goal of having a treatment system commissioned in early June of 2023, which would restore, which if successful, would restore the blending facility capacity as soon as summer of 2023. So like I mentioned earlier, this is a parallel path. So the water quality evaluation and design work will be going, the early design work at least will be going on at the same time. And this early design is going to include the site surveys. And will also include during this phase the cost estimates, including operation and maintenance costs for the 6 MGD treatment system. And then we'll be also starting design of the plan is to start the design of the vessels, their specifications as well, early in the process, again, to allow for the long lead time needed for the vessels. And then I mentioned earlier about one of the elements of this project is a basis of design, including cost estimates for a long-term potential future treatment system. That work would be done during the summer of 2022. So with this schedule, we do anticipate returning to the board. So this project is the study, including the full water quality evaluation and its design and procurement assistance. We would anticipate returning to the board in the summer of this year for authorization for the vessel procurement, which we currently anticipate may cost approximately $1 million. We would also anticipate returning to the board later in the winter of this year for board authorization for the facility construction contract, which we anticipate may be in the range of $10 to $15 million. So this evening, we'll be recommending or requesting the board authorize a professional service agreement with Trussell Technologies Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $1,363,127 to provide engineering and professional services to support moving forward with this project. We are available to answer questions. Any questions?
Mr.
All right.
Wickham, this is Director Sethi.
Yes, sir.
Do you have an illustration as to how this would be implemented at our well fields? I'm trying to figure out whether this is all the wells that we're pumping from feed into one large vessel, or is it vessels in the plural, one per well?
Sir, we did not create our own illustration, but we do. In general, it would be so the wells currently they feed into common manifolds. So like the wells from one, from both the Maui well field and the PT well field each have separate pipe which then connects into a common well field. The concept with this would be we would be taking flow off, diverting flow from that common manifold, running it through a treatment system, which depending on the type of media selected, would consist of multiple vessels. So these vessels are arranged in trains. So it would probably, for a 6 MGD system, I believe that's going to be six pressure vessels. And I'll see if I can find an illustration, but we didn't prepare one separately, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Mike, really, it's tricky to present something on the screen that we haven't posted on the website in advance, just in terms of making sure everybody can see the same information. But I think Mike's description is accurate. Each of the well fields, the water from all of the wells on each well field flows into a different large pipe, and the water from that large pipe from each well field can be controlled and then treated through a series of these pressure vessels. The pressure vessels would be located under the current concept at our Peralta Tyson blending facility near the intersection of Maori and Peralta, and it kind of tucked back into the site, and that's where the treated water could then be included as a stream into our blending facility and blended with other sources for service to our customers. So the treated water would be would meet the needs of the overall project to ensure that we're not serving PFAS to our customers after the treatment. So I guess a verbal description might have to do for now.
What's the physical footprint of that this will occupy on the property?
Yeah, I think Mr. Wickham has that.
I can, yes, it'll take me a minute to find.
Sure, and I'll just, while Mr. Wickham's looking that up, I'll indicate that this is kind of preliminary at this point, as you can, I'm sure, understand. We have yet to complete the bench testing. We have yet to really spec out the details, but from a rough order of magnitude, we have a general idea.
Yes.
So
Sure,
if
go
I
on.
may, while Mr. Wickham is looking, I'm just going to say generally there's cost saving in consolidate different well treatment into one treatment train and one treatment system. I guess that's a better way to put it. And each treatment system depends on size, site constraint, concentration, what you are trying to remove, and the volume. You could have parallel treatment system with multiple vessels, or you could have one single treatment system. I think it's a little bit too early to call without doing additional study to say how ours would look like in terms of footprint, because part of that design is not just treatment, there's also a cost consideration, right? I'm sure staff will be looking at optimization, figure out a way to achieve what we need at the cheapest possible method, and that sometimes drives the footprint of the treatment system.
Yes, thank you. So just based off of, and again, we're the part of this study effort also includes a design which would have more of a layout with measurements. So I don't have that currently. I do have graphics with some rough dimensions. And for a 6 MGD system, which would be a series of 3 vessel trains, it looks like each vessel train has a footprint of approximately, let's say, and again, these are not exact numbers, so I'm estimating based off of a diagram. It looks like approximately 40 feet by 20 feet for each one of those, and there would be 3, and then there would be some additional equipment and piping probably laid around those as well.
I think it's difficult. We apologize for not having a graphic. Again, since we don't have a design, it's difficult. But if you picture, a train might be 2 large tanks, maybe 12 to 15 feet in diameter, and they're kind of a lead lag, so it flows through one through the other. And then because of depending on how much you're trying to treat, you can add more kind of couples of these tanks. So I think the anticipation that we're looking at now is maybe 6 tanks total. Is that right, Mike?
Yes.
So 3 trains of 2 tanks. So you'd see, if you went out there, if it was out in the field, you'd see 6 large tanks, maybe 12 to 15 feet in diameter, maybe 12 to 15 feet tall, with the piping. So the water would flow through these tanks one after the other to be treated. And then as the water passes through, let's say ion exchange, the PFAS is pulled off onto the media as it passes through.
I have one final question. Do we have any assurance as to the reduction in the PFAS levels after the water goes through this system? Is it 100%, 90%, 80% reduction? What is it?
Yes, sir. The treatment goals for this system are essentially 100%. Our treatment goals are to treat that 6 MGD of water to non-detect PFAS levels. And the result of that would be essentially it'd be an additional 6 MGD of water we could blend with our well water that has PFAS. This would be an additional 6 MGD of water with no PFAS we could blend. So the goals are non-detect.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I have one other, it's actually a request in the future for a cost break-even analysis on, assuming we invest up to $15 million here, the trade-off is purchasing more San Francisco water. So when does this pay for itself down the road?
I think that's difficult because really the challenge we're facing is lack of production. I mean, there is an additional cost. I think we estimated since the beginning of the PFAS, reoperations is maybe $3 million a year we bought of extra SFPUC water. But that was also due to other water quality challenges at the treatment plant. So, maybe $2 to $3 million a year, you know, is the savings by not using the SFPUC water. The challenge is that all that does, you know, allow us to deliver water, but again, we've lost that 10 to 12 MGD of delivery capacity, and that's really the driver, right? When summer comes, luckily demands are down because of the drought. But if we were facing, you know, kind of historically high demands, we'd have a challenge meeting those demands, not being able to produce water at the blending facility. So there is a cost, you know, offset by using less SFPUC water, but that's not an alternative as far as production goes.
Has the staff given any thought to putting PT1 back, or TP1 back in service?
I think long-term, there's lots of considerations, right? So the goal of this project is to basically address the immediate problem and then be able to use these facilities in the future. Part of the scope of this project is actually to look long-term at the blending facility. And I think part of that discussion for the district will be a broader discussion about future RO facilities, future treatment, you know, other treatment facilities coming back online. So I think that's not part of this project. I think that's part of the larger discussion going forward, long-term, that have to consider our different water supplies, reliability, groundwater basin management, and lots of factors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the presentation.
And it's being part of the, again, being part of the operations water quality committee, I'm sure you'll be getting updates, and you'll know more about this project than you probably care to know about if it moves forward. So.
Other board members have questions on this? Okay, let me raise some. We have a system with several water supply sources, the well field probably being our largest and most reliable. However, we have a 90 MGD capacity and our demand is anywhere from 25 to 50 MGD. We have an additional, you're talking about as you pointed out, a summer load when we go up toward the 50 MGD level. I question the need to rush into a dual track system with an emergency response and the additional cost. When we have operation, without evaluating in a little more detail what our operational options are. TP1 is one example, putting that back as a conventional plant, which ran 8 to 10 million MGD right there. For 10 to 11 million dollars, we would have that. And we wouldn't. The second part is that there is so many uncertainties and we're trying to chase something that we don't know what the real requirements are going to be. They're evolving with each report coming out of Washington, D.C. and an incredibly increasing list of contaminants. So does it make sense to do a dual track system? Should we study it a little bit further? We've shown that we have portions of the well field of the groundwater basin that have non-detect, and being able to tap into that more effectively and efficiently may be part of a lower cost solution than jumping into something that is going to be an ongoing expense with ongoing maintenance cost to try and run something. The San Francisco system is not a concurrent and even water supply. Sometimes they take it from local resources in the runoff of Calaveras and San Antonio. Other times they bring it in from Hetch Hetchy, which is wonderful water. And that's becoming more problematic with the unimpaired flows. So I would encourage the staff to look at some of the other operational opportunities here before we jump into signing a construction contract and going down a path to get a marginal water supply treatment. The overall cost compared to some of the other decisions the board has recently made, including $100 million for Los Vaqueros, which won't be seen until 2032, is much less of a boondoggle. But And we do have a new financial analyst that we're bringing on board, which we may be able to take advantage of in this project as well, and primarily identified for AMI. But we need to do some more engineering economics and review what we're doing and why we're doing it. We have a wonderfully diverse system with overcapacity. Are we chasing what's currently there without looking at what the real potential of the system is? So that's my rhetorical comment. Thank you.
If I may, President Wee, I have a question for staff.
Please.
I think we heard from the directors that there's a desire to use the deep aquifer to blend down the PFAS concentration, for lack of a better word. With our existing well system, do we even have that ability, or do we need to drill a new well?
One thing before perhaps Mr. Samples comes in, I would add that one thing we know from all of our work with the Nelscombe groundwater basin is that the fresh water in the deep aquifer comes from the Fremont Centerville aquifer and the Newark aquifer. That's where the water source is.
Okay.
So if you can imagine somehow pulling a lot more water out of the deep aquifer, it comes from somewhere, and we know that the PFAS exists in the source for the deep aquifer. So that may be a temporary fix, perhaps very temporary, but ultimately what we'd be doing is pulling the problem into the aquifer that currently does not have significant levels of PFAS. Right now, we have limited extraction capacity from the deep aquifer. It's generally expensive and so forth to pump from those depths and so forth. But certainly we have, and as Mr. Ahrens pointed out, we are looking even more closely now at the potential of more wells, but we'd have to add wells. That's not outside the question, but it doesn't solve the real problem.
Right. And that you actually, Mr. Stevenson, thank you. You actually addressed what was going to be question number 2, which is, will we cause the migration of this contaminated water that's contaminated with PFAS, and actually bring it down to our deep aquifer and contaminate a existing clean aquifer? That is something that we want to avoid, right? And in terms of using San Francisco PUC water or restart treatment plant number 1, I think we all need to remember that this is our groundwater basin. This is our only reliable local water supply. There won't be, if we have more drought, there won't be sufficient water to run both TP1 and TP2. We need to make sure that our local aquifer is in a good enough shape that we could use if we need this water in an emergency and in the drought. Part of that responsibility is to treat the contaminants that's currently in there. So I definitely support going with this study. And I know Director Wee definitely has concerns, but just remember, this is a study, right? We definitely will have off-runs.
Thank you. The point I was trying to make is, let us do the study. I have no problem doing studies. But rather than determining what the solution is at this point, without, there are 2 elements. 1, let's get the results of the study. And second, try and get identify what the issues and criteria standards we're going to have to meet are before we rush into a solution. We have a solution with desal in Newark that clears up the water.
Mm-hmm.
Might we be looking at a similar reverse osmosis facility at the blending? So there are other solutions. I'm concerned about making a determination of what the solution is until we know what the challenge is, and that won't be known because it's evolving.
So I think question for staff, and I think this is a fair question, is I assume you will also be exploring other possibility as a permanent solution, right? Not just IX and GAC.
That's correct. And one of the things that, staff, we were trying to kind of summarize the overall issues and topics in the presentation, but you're absolutely right, President Weed, that We are looking at an interim solution, and we are planning for a permanent solution at sort of along the process. One of the possible solutions for the future for both PFAS, some unknown, unregulated contaminant that may show up, also perhaps hardness and so forth at the blending facility may be a reverse osmosis. But one of the things we also know is that when you remove constituents from the water with reverse osmosis, you concentrate them into a stream, and that stream has to be dealt with. And so already we're thinking ahead about the possibilities of what that ultimate solution might entail. And if it does entail reverse osmosis, we already know that one very possible option to deal with that concentrate stream is through exactly the treatment technology that was described here this evening, and that is through ion exchange and or GAC, and using these same types of pressure vessels. So we feel like the odds of taking a wrong step for the permanent solution are pretty low.
Well, let me also note that there's been discussions of making PFAS a hazardous waste,
Mhm.
which would be financially mind-boggling to all of us. And how do you deal with the hazardous waste product if you have to truck your effluent to an appropriate site and had no potential for release or treatment? So that's part of the emerging risk that we have yet to be identified for us. That's why the concern I had with dual tracking a solution. Well, we're still trying to learn what the problem is and what the challenges are. Thank you.
I have another question and some comments, if I may. This is a question of staff. After the water goes through these different trains or vessels, does it reduce the hardness of the water at the same time?
No, sir, the path we're proposing would be a PFAS only treatment. It would not address hardness. A potential future treatment system could, but this one would not. That's
And you know, I'm sure Director Weed and myself, we both remember when we had the world's largest water softening plant there at Maui, Peralta, the largest structure that you could see from all around town, tallest structure. And we still have the concrete foundation for where that original structure stood. And so it kind of begs the question as to whether we really should be investing in a mini version of our desal plant or a replica of it in Newark and put it on that footprint over there, because that would reduce, that would clean up the PFAS at the same time it would reduce the hardness of the water. I will make one comment in concurrence with Director Wong that, you know, just 5-6 years ago, PFAS was hardly mentioned. The topic never came up. And it's like this huge wave that overcame the water industry, where now it's a real topic of discussion. It's on the news, it's in the newspaper. The public is becoming more and more aware of this as a water quality issue, a quality of life issue. And so I think it's incumbent upon the water district to at least get the study done and show that we're taking some initiative to address what is becoming a much bigger public concern. So I'm in favor of getting the study done, but I think there are a number of things here that I have questions about whether we're investing $15 million is the right thing right now. Can we get by purchasing more San Francisco water over the next 2-3 years? Should we put in a desal plant on that site? Should we look at reoperating TP1? At the time that we mothballed that, we said it was going to be mothballed for 10 years. And I don't think the board has seen any plans for how we might reoperate that at some point. So I have a lot of questions that are outstanding, but I think that we do need to address the public concern.
I'd like to follow up with Director Sethi, Director Weed along. I think this is, I'm for the study. However, I truly fear the hazardous waste concept raised by Director Weed. I've raised that too in committee. I think we have regulation, it's being driven in parts per trillion without any or with very little of looking at other ramifications of what the regulations are going to dictate to us. However, we got to do the study and studies are good. It gives us information. And I think there's a general, I don't think the public fully understands. Quite honestly, I'm not sure I fully understand PFAS and the danger. I've yet to see what I've seen in the past regarding other hazardous materials. The same here, they're forever chemicals. That's what I've heard. So I hope somebody out there in the chemistry land is dealing with this. I do know there are people out there dealing with it, because my biggest fear is, you know, we can get this stuff out of the water in parts per trillion, but does it really matter if we have parts per thousand or parts per million in the dust in our house? And I agree with the other directors on this study. Okay, fine. But are we really, what are we looking at? This could be really ugly in the near future. Hopefully it won't be. So I'll stop with that tonight.
Like my fellow directors, I'm also in favor of the study that that staff has proposed tonight. You know, I think this is, like was mentioned, I think this is becoming a much more in the public's conscious, especially with so much more media attention around the dangers of PFAS. And so I think this will give us a good sense of how we can best address it for our community. And so I'll be voting in favor tonight.
Well, I'm a bit confused with what the motion is. Is it to proceed with both a study and with a plan for issuing a RFP for the construction?
Yes, they will lead, and this will initiate the study. They'll begin with water quality analysis and bench scale testing to find the media that treats PFAS. That'll then generate a design for the vessels themselves, which will come to a board, and then ultimately the full facility. So you're not committing to going down that path, but that's where it's leading.
And
But
this,
we're funding a design effort, right?
Yes.
That's what I would encourage us to separate the two, do additional studies, do additional operational analysis to see if there are other alternatives that'll buy us some time.
And I'll just state, that's an option. Again, we were driven as staff by our schedule, trying to get this in place. We were hoping initially when we went out for this to have something in place by this coming summer. And after talking to consultants, that's just not feasible, given the quantity of water that we want to treat. So we're trying to get something in place by summer of 23. And the only way to do that is to concurrently start design when we start the testing. We can do a more linear, do analysis first before we start any design. That would just push us past the summer of 23 and make it 2 years that we've got to get through, 2 summer seasons. And then we'd be targeting the summer of 24 to try to have something in place.
And that identifies that our concern is the 6 MGD during the summer months, During the rest of the year, we don't have the concern.
Obviously, I mean, the total capacity loss is around 12 MGD. We need 6 MGD of PFAS-free water, and in order to make up, blending 50-50, that turns into 12 MGD. And again, depending on demands, and really it's the flexibility, meaning, yes, we have capacity today, as long as TP2 is running at its full capacity and the desal facility is running at its capacity. If we have water quality challenges in the summer, or algae, or something that reduces capacity of the treatment plant, we don't have the ability to just increase flows at the blending facility, again, unless the board wants to exceed notification levels, which again means going out and notifying all the cities and other agencies that we've exceeded that level. That's a possibility that staff does not recommend. We think delivering high quality water is our priority, so this is really aimed at ensuring that situation does not occur, or we don't have to do emergency rationing because we don't have supplies. Again, it's just a risk, so we're trying to minimize the risk going forward by having something in place to give us that flexibility and capacity at the blending facility.
And one of our other alternatives is to purchase additional San Francisco water.
Not at the blending facility. I mean, we have other turnouts. Again, that's assuming San Francisco has water available. It seems like this year's drought hopefully is changing, but there was potential that there was not going to be additional SFPUC water available. But technically, we could take direct water off our interties with them if we needed to. Mike could probably comment on our flexibility in doing that and kind of how much we can make up in that way.
And I'll just add that we are hearing from San Francisco that the cost of San Francisco water is going to be going up significantly.
Well, San Francisco just released reports indicating that they would have a remarkably high water supply based on the snow bank reservoir, as well as the filling up of their local facilities. San Francisco enjoys about 6 years of surface water capacity and storage. And so they have a multi-year response capability. And right now they've done very well in recent weeks. So again, we do get San Francisco water at the wellhead for blending. It would strike me that San Francisco water is readily available. It just, I would encourage us to delay the decision on initiating a design until you've have a little more information. And I would also encourage you strongly to look at the Union Sanitary District effluent and determine what the PFAS levels are there, because that would impact a very expensive project. Thank you.
Sir, like Mr. Aarons was alluding to, our blending facility ability to take San Francisco water is limited to approximately 12 to 12.5 million gallons a day. And that's what's actually limiting the facility's maximum rate when we control for PFAS. So though we may be willing to buy the water, we can't get it there. So with the additional San Francisco, if we use it to make up for that loss, is going to be from the direct takeoffs, or would have to be from the direct takeoffs. And again, like Mr. Aarons mentioned, depending on any potential water quality issues at TP2, that capacity may or may not be enough. The blending facility is our largest production facility. Of the roughly 90 MGD of potential production capacity we have, the blending facility is a little over half of that number, right? Because it's rated at 48 of that. So currently with controlling for PFAS, we're reliably can get about 22 to 24. It's for information, sir.
Yeah, the other operational influence here is conservation. We're currently experiencing a reduction of the amount of water you're speaking of in our consumption. So our summer loads dropped this summer and may well drop again next summer. Are we designing for a load that is not, a demand that we won't see for several years? is there really a need to rush it through for this coming summer if we have good continued conservation?
If I could just mention that if the drought continues, right now we are running on stored water. There's a limited amount of stored water. We are not getting allocations from the state. Theoretically, if the drought continues, those allocations stay low or go away or stay zero, then we need that groundwater basin. And we will be forced to pull the water out of the groundwater basin in order to meet the needs of our customers, even as low as they have been. So we are dealing with lots of unknowns. I will say these are great questions, and this has been a good discussion amongst the board. I do see that there's a member of the public who has their hand raised.
All right, please, let's open it up then for public comment.
Thank you. Is it my turn, President Weed?
Yes, please.
Yes. So thank you very much for this presentation. It's, as others have pointed out, it's a very germane topic. I will maybe start out with perhaps a side comment, which is, regardless of whether the end solution is this type of treatment plant, reinstating TP1, or if possible, buying more SFPC water, it's an additional expense to the district. And I'm very, very glad that the district did not spend the $68 million buying the N3 ranch. This is a much more germane and valuable use of district funds to preserve the quality of the water that's actually going to the customers. So the way that worked out, I think, was the right answer for the customers of the district. Turning to the topic at hand, it seems like we haven't made a decision yet on the actual treatment modality, whether it's GAC, IX, or RO, or some other method. And it seems like that's part of the intent of this study. Looking at the numbers, it looks like the contaminant of concern, or the contaminant which is causing the most consternation for the district, is PFOS, which is coming out of the well field at roughly double the notification level. This is the reason why the district apparently is having an operational issue in terms of the capacity of the blending facility, because we're limited in the intake of the SFPC water to 11 to 12 MGD, and at a 50-50 blend ratio, that gives you between 22 and 24 MGD of product, as staff reported. One concern is that if the concentration of PFOS increases in the well water, the blend ratio would then have to be further tilted in favor of SFPC, thereby reducing the operational capacity of the well fields. Given the uncertain source of water, e.g. the drought, I believe it is important for the district to maintain as much operational flexibility as possible. And that is, I believe, why the staff is recommending a hurry up offense on getting this pilot plant built. One thing I will point out, in making the choice between GAC, IX, and RO, is, and it was alluded to in terms of the comments made about, if this material is labeled as hazardous waste, is, what do you do with it? None of these treatment methodologies eliminates the PFAS. It just moves it. It takes it out of the water and puts it somewhere else. And in the case of GAC, you have to either you destroy it by incineration, or you have to regenerate it. And I'm concerned that the costs for regeneration of GAC are going to increase and continue to increase. And I ask that the staff carefully evaluate the long-term projections of GAC regeneration costs. Similarly, IX and PFAS in general being an anion, this would be an anionic IX. There are two modalities for IX. One is once through and then incineration, or regeneration. And again, once you regenerate with a salt solution, and the effluent from that would then would contain high concentrations of PFAS and would have to be dealt with. And again, what are the costs of discharging and dealing with that effluent. RO does have the advantage of removing PFAS and also hardness. And again, as Mr. Stevenson mentioned, yes, there are issues with effluent. As far as concerns about this investment being stranded, and I think Director Sethi alluded to the water treatment or the softening plant that used to exist. One if this whole thing does become unused, one thing one could do is replace the anion exchange with a cation exchange and actually reduce the hardness. It's unfortunate that the PFAS and the cations in the water are of opposite polarity, and therefore a single ion exchange can't remove both. But I mean, that's one other alternative is to go ahead and do that. So in general, there's a lot of uncertainty about this. I can appreciate Director Weed's position that the dust hasn't settled and therefore go slow. On the other hand, there's a lot of uncertainty about the sources of water and the various sources that the district has at its disposal to serve its customers. And the regulatory climate, it's pretty clear, it's getting tighter. So I do support the district moving forward with exploring the various options to treat the PFAS, keeping in mind when they do the study to very carefully consider the long-term running costs, that is the regeneration cost of GAC, or the how do you regenerate the IX if you choose to go down the IX route. Thank you very much.
Mr. Nakamura, just a quick comment. Thank you for your comments. The issue for tonight before us, and I think you've raised the point that there are a number of different design solutions that need to be evaluated. We're being asked to select a design solution and initiate the design this evening, and not look at the other alternatives as part of this motion. That was my concern. I believe the study of the PFAS and what the issues are and evaluation of the alternatives is warranted. I'm concerned about making a decision this evening to initiate design for a specific solution until that evaluation has been made. Thank you.
President Wee, can I have additional questions for staff? So, question for staff. First, is this an interim solution, or are we looking at a long-term solution?
This would be a near-term solution. The approach was with this, and the intent of this was to essentially buy us time. We're looking for something we would have a possibility. I would consider it probably interim.
Okay, and we are still exploring. We'll have yet another parallel path to look at the long-term and the ultimate solution to this contamination problem, correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's actually part of the scope of this project. So I'm going to sorry, Mr. Champagne, I'm going to try to take control back to you so I can move the slides. Yes, ma'am. That was one of the parts of the scope. I'll page back up.
So let's talk about the preliminary design you want to do. So basically, all you're designing are the vessels, right? Not the media. So you could still choose between iron exchange and granulated activated carbon, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So the time I think for me personally, you made a very good case for the urgency to allow us to have that operational flexibility just in case we have another drought next year. I am actually okay. Would you proceed with just designing the vessel? This definitely does preclude reverse osmosis because the vessels are not designed to accommodate the fibers, the membranes for the RO. But knowing the cost of the RO is not a good interim or temporary solution. Okay, so that's a personal thought. And this is coming from someone who worked on contaminated groundwater treatment in multiple different locations. All right, I can see the flexibility or start to design the tank, the size of the tank, and perhaps the piping, how things will at a very high level. This next question I want to verify is that even if we go down the path to design the vessel, we still could put a stop to it right? It has to come back to the board to purchase the vessel for the actual construction. So we do have another off-ramp. And what staff is offering right now is actually give us a bit more flexibility by going down this path. So I'm actually okay with it. I guess as our members of the public have stated, if we design the vessel and we end up decide to go to an RO or some other way, we could always repurpose this thing somewhere.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I think that is an important point, that I think this is an interim solution, but is a very high likelihood of being a part of or all of or the basis of all of the permanent solution. And just for an added little tidbit, because I'm a very big RO person, was involved in the desalination facility, was involved in the design for a RO treatment plant at that facility. This would not actually necessarily be a stranded asset if we went to RO for all of our treatment needs for groundwater at the PT well field and the Mowry well field. This would in fact be part of the treatment system for the concentrate stream to deal with the issues that were described earlier this evening about the discharge of PFAS and concentrated PFAS to the environment, which is going to be regulated and going to be an issue. So believe me, these are issues that I was asking a lot of questions about with staff, because initially I had many of the same concerns that we're hearing from the board, which are legitimate. I think that there's very low likelihood that we end up in the wrong place by doing this interim project. But you're right, this is the study and this is design of the initial pressure vessel approach. There will be additional actions by the board that will be needed. There'll be purchase of the pressure vessels. There will be certainly a construction project if indeed things continue to go down this road, but they may not, pending the results of the work that we're talking about starting tonight. So we are at the very, very beginning of this process. Staff has done a great job of trying to get us set up in a way that we can move very quickly and yet carefully. And we're really trying to balance all of those objectives with this work.
President Weed, I would like to move for approval of the staff recommendation on this item and also ask for a short break for all of us. We've gone nearly 2 hours without a break.
All right. Well, okay, we have a motion. I think we get the.
I'll
we get a
go
second.
ahead and second.
Okay, I have one quick comment to the motion before I call for the vote. Would it be possible to, even on our next agenda, to have a proposal to do the broader study for what follows this interim solution and how this interim solution might be incorporated into a longer term solution? I recall Santa Barbara spending $40 million on a desal plant that produced 40 MGD of water total. So big mistakes have been made by some. And we did it on TP2 with the filtration, $30 million with nothing to show for it. So let us do the broader study and not get locked into an interim solution and not see beyond it. So let's call for the vote. If there's no other comment. Roll call,
Directors.
please.
Okay, Director Sethi,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
All right.
Huang,
Aye.
and Weed.
A reluctant aye. Thank you. Let us take a short break and be back within hopefully 10 minutes. Thank you. A restart. All right. We hammered that one. Let our next go to reports.
Yeah, and staff is certainly available to address any questions the board may have with regard to board committee reports, item 6.1.
Is there any comments or questions relating to any of the reports by board members? There being none, let us then move on to operational reports. Is there any comment or question relating to the operational reports?
I do see a hand up from a member of the public, Mr. Ken Nishimura.
Yes, Ms. Moore.
Yeah, I just happened to review the hardness map for December and noticed that it's gone up considerably, and also that the production, I guess it's mostly due to the production at the desal coming way below the nameplate capacity. Is there a reason why that happened?
Yes, sir. Do you have an answer to that, Mr. Ahrens?
Yeah, our desal facility was offline for, I'm not sure, about most of the month due to maintenance and some repair work. So production at that plant was not producing for much of the month.
Okay, thank you.
Fine, thank you. And if there are no other comments from members of the board, then we can move on to staff presentations, item 6.3.
Thank you, President Weed. And our first item is 6.3.1 water account collections procedures, and I will turn it over to our Director of Finance, Jonathan Wunderlich, to introduce this item.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Several months ago, as we were going through our rates workshops with the board, there was a request that we come back to the board to talk about our use of a third-party collections agency. And so this evening's presentation is intended to be responsive to that request. We will touch briefly on how we handle collections for active accounts. The collections agency is only used for closed accounts that don't pay their final bill. And so much of the presentation will then focus on that. We have with us this evening, Jacqueline Simon, our customer service supervisor, and Chris Davison with our third-party collections agency financial credit network to provide this presentation. And so I will now turn it over to Ms. Simon to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. If I can please have the next slide, Marian. Thank you. Good evening, members of the board, members of the public and staff. During this series of financial workshops, it was asked that we explain how we handle closed accounts with our third-party agency. Today, I will provide a brief overview of our staff's efforts, the collection process, and our partnership with Financial Credit Network. Next slide, please. Alameda County Water District follows the board-approved policy to properly handle all delinquent accounts. Delinquent accounts are defined as any account that remains unpaid with no payment arrangement. Our staff's overall goal is to work with our customers, identify what payment options work best for them, and coordinate a payment arrangement to bring their account current. Next slide, please. On closed accounts, we take a slightly different approach. When an account is closed, a final statement is sent to the customer. If no payment is received, an overdue notice is sent on day 28. After 60 days, any unpaid closed account receives a final bill statement, followed by a courtesy call. If no payment is made, the account is written off by day 90 and assigned to our outside collections agency. Next slide, please. In surveying other water agencies in the area and reviewing their policies and procedures, we found that the handling of past due accounts was similar to that of ACWD. They do not have an in-house collections department. Instead, they utilize a third-party collections agency. The board previously discussed the utilization of the property tax roll and declined to move forward with it. In an attempt to assist customers through their financial hardships, the board decided to continue using our current process. We are pleased to welcome Chris Davison, Vice President of Financial Credit Network, to share an overview of her organization and how we share values pertaining to customer service. Welcome, Chris.
Good evening. I'm going to share my screen. Hold on just a second. All right. So thank you very much for having us this evening, and thank you for allowing me to give you an overview of our role in your collection process. As Jacqueline said, I'm Chris Davison. I am the Vice President of Financial Credit Network. I want to tell you a little bit about us very briefly this evening. We were founded in 1954, and one of our first industries that we serviced was the utility industry. We're very people-focused. You'll see that throughout the presentation, and we have an abundant amount of experience serving several water districts throughout the state, as well as CalWater, and we've been your partner since 2005. A quick review of our approach to collections. It's really important that you understand that the face of collections has changed over the past decade. I don't know what all of you think of when you think of a collection agency, but it's probably changed since you thought about it. We do believe that people are supposed to pay for services that they receive, but we also take a different approach these days, more of a bees to honey kind of approach. We do have a program that we follow. It was developed by Mary Shores, who is a collection agency owner. And there's four pillars that we work with. And that is the understanding of the power of connection, words used to connect with your consumers, meaning using terms like, let's see how we can work with you. I can hear your frustration. Let's see what we can do together to resolve this. So in this training, in this approach that we have given our staff, they are trained to not say the word no, but to be a partner with the consumer. Also transformative ways of communicating, methods for our collectors to handle the very high tense conversations that you probably understand we might have. So just ways for them to communicate without that stress and to bring the tension down in the conversation. Responding to no, obviously you must realize that we get a lot of no's in our industry, a lot of people saying, no, we won't pay. So we have a whole scripting of how to overcome those no's. And finally, negotiating strategies. It used to be that we would ask, how are you going to pay this account in full today? We don't do that as much anymore. We basically start our conversations with, how can we help you? And then we guide them into a payment arrangement by asking qualifying questions. If you set up a person on a payment arrangement that's too high, they'll fail. If it's too low, then the district loses. So we have to have a certain strategy to get that information so that we can set up a win-win payment arrangement with your customers. So these methods are really important because they reinforce our company mission, which is value people, collect money in that order. It sounds kind of salesy, but it's actually the way we do business. Multi-language program, I wanted to let you know that we understand that your community is very diverse and we want to speak to people in their primary language. So we employ a very diverse staff, as well as utilize a language line that helps people speak in their primary language. We also mail all of our notices in both English and Spanish. Call recording, part of our accountability is to the district is having our calls recorded. So all of our in and outbound collection calls are recorded. And although we have a very low, if any, complaints rate with Alameda, if we hear that there's a complaint, we are able to pull those calls and listen. 99.9% of the time, it's not always the way the consumer said it was, but that 0.1% of the time that it is, we employ humans just like anybody else. So if there's a verified complaint, we have processes, we have disciplinary action, and we have training, obviously, for the team. Standard work standards. It's important that we have work standards. All agencies send letters, they make phone calls, but when we reach something, we turn on our superpower, and our superpower is our ears. We turn them on so that we can hear what the person is saying. So it's surprising how much you can learn just by listening. So that is our, I think our secret sauce is we are listeners. We do dial prioritizing different types of accounts. So we dial new business. So any new business you send to us, we try and jump on it very quickly. We also have what's called today's work, where a collector will calendar something and then work it that day. Broken promises and plans. So if someone hasn't sent in a payment on the time that they said that they would, we make follow-up calls to that. And then prior day's work, which is basically backlog. Our follow-up criteria has changed dramatically through new regulation, Regulation F, and we have had to change some of our approaches. The law came into effect in November of last year, and it was over 600 pages. So you can only imagine how many changes we've had to make. Technology, communication methods are ever changing. If you're old school like me, you love the telephone, you actually like to talk to people, but generations coming up don't necessarily want to talk to people. So we've had to adapt to new technologies such as email, text, chat, self-service portals. They want to log into something and take care of it themselves. So as those technologies have come along, we've been working towards some of, we're not on all of those things, but we're on many of them. Legislation is starting to catch up. The legislation through Regulation F is helping us a little bit, but we try, if it doesn't work, we kind of tweak it and try something different, always looking to monitor those trends. Security and controls. Y'all don't want to end up on the news because your information has been compromised. So we work very hard and have very strict controls for security. We're SOC 2 Type 2 certified, which is a very stringent audit that we have to go through. And then we're PCI, which is Payment Card Industry certified. So for any credit cards we receive, we have to, again, we're audited and we follow strict guidelines. So I've talked a lot about your data and I've talked a lot about your consumers. Now I kind of want to talk about the team approach we take with your team. We work very hard to create a great relationship with them. One of the things that we provide is Client View, which is a client portal. So your team has access to your accounts at any given time, and it's a real-time access to their, so that they can view account notes, they can know what's going on with the account, they can see payments, it's all, and it's real time. You currently have 6 users on that. Collaboration, I love that word. When I was creating this PowerPoint, I was trying to think of a good word for our relationship, and collaboration was a word that just kept coming to mind. Our teams work very well together. Your team, you should be very proud of your finance team because they work very well with outside agencies. Our team enjoys that relationship, and we have developed that collaborative approach over the years that we've worked with your team. Flexibility, one size doesn't fit all. If there's a problem, we work together to figure it out and have done that very well. And then availability, the district team doesn't get voicemail when they call. They usually talk to a real life person. Obviously with COVID, we've had some challenges like everybody else, but in the typical time, they're able to talk to us, and we meet with them. Well, we used to meet with them in person annually. We've been meeting by Zoom, but we hope to get back to meeting with them in person, face to face. And you say, okay, tell us about this collaboration. Well, we have a really recent example. When the state offered an arrearage program to utility vendors throughout the state, the district jumped in and applied, And some of those customers had already been sent to bad debt. So they worked with our team and we were able to get all of those funds applied very quickly. Your team was the first team of all of our clients to get it taken care of. So now you have over 180 customers that were assigned to collections that are now, mostly all of them are fully resolved, some of them partially. So working together, we got it done in record time. And then last but not least, we are huge believers in education. We believe that providing our knowledge to our clients is extremely important. So we have something called FCN University, where we provide education on a monthly basis, an hour-long workshop that we provide to clients free of charge. And so if anyone's interested in that, you can go to our website and check that out. That's all that I have. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate you being here with us today. Okay, in closing, having an in-house collections team or department allows organizations to directly manage the customer relationship. Nevertheless, we know this would come at a considerable cost to the district. After considering personnel needs, trainings, mailings, software, legal support, office space, etc., all of which are additional expenses. Our focus remains on supporting our customers in their times of need. With our partnership with Financial Credit Network, we could extend that support to ensure their outstanding account is paid in full. And this concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Is there any public comment on this item? There currently being none, directed to the board. Are there any board comments related to it?
Thank you, President Weed. My question is for Ms. Davison. Can you provide us any kind of statistics on the number of accounts that you've reached out to on behalf of ACWD and the success that you've had in moving them onto payment plans that they've paid through?
We have, again, we've been with you for a number of years. Over that amount of time, you've assigned over 12,000 accounts. So you probably on average assign recently probably 50 accounts per month. I don't have statistics in front of me. I wasn't prepared for how many are on payment plans, but our success rate is about 21% for you, which is above the national average. For utilities, the average is a lot lower than that. But our success rate's about 20%. Does that answer?
It does, yes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other board members?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Ms. Simon and Chris, Ms. Davison, this was an excellent presentation. I learned a lot more about the credit collection industry than I've ever known here. And thank you, Ms. Davison. And it's also good to know that although the success rate is not what I thought it would be, that it's quite a bit higher than the standard for the utility industry. And I will close by saying, I was glad to see on the very first slide that you are just off Main Street in Visalia. It is one of my favorite towns in all of California. And I love going there. I love all the restaurants, the people, the small town atmosphere, especially during the holiday season. You live in a wonderful community with a really strong chamber of commerce, by the way.
Yes. Well, may I add one comment? I've learned more about the water industry than I ever thought I would as well, just by sitting on this. So it's been a very educational evening.
Thank you. All right, if there are no other questions, I have some. When we turn over an account to you, and someone fails to pay immediately, does a report go on their credit rating as a delinquent account?
The credit bureaus require certain information. So they require either a full date of birth or a full social security number. The district does not provide either one of those. I say that There are times when a consumer will give us, believe it or not, will give us their social security number. If they provide us with that social security number, the account becomes eligible for credit reporting. I thought perhaps you might ask me this question, so I pulled some statistics. And out of over 12,649 accounts, we have, over the life of your contract, again, since 2005, credit reported 33. So less than 1%. It's not, and those were more from early in our contract. I only saw one that was in the last 4 years. So I can't tell you no, they don't credit report, but the likelihood is very small.
Does ACWD make credit reports on clients who are delinquent in their buildings?
Oh, no, we, as the district directly, we do not, because we don't collect social security numbers.
All right, so you do not have the ability to make that credit report. That's good news. Next, my concern is, and we have one in the chart, I appreciate it, that we could use the county tax collector to collect these same bills at no cost to the district and receive nearly universal 100 rather than 21% recovery, 99+% recovery. That would take 3 votes of the board. It would eliminate the potential for kicking someone when they're down with a bad credit report or other issues.
You've got the second vote right here.
I strongly encourage you, the third vote in this board, to consider using the county tax collector for the collection of past due bills. We recently had a case where we denied an applicant the ability to even get a water hookup because a prior tenant had not paid the water bill and required the property owner to pick up the tab. That's a bad policy because you want the user to pay the bill, but you always have, with the ability to pick up the payments on the part of the property owner, which you can do on delinquent payments, and it's been cleared by our attorney. That would be a far better choice. I would encourage us to terminate collections through the outside contractor, private contractor, eliminate the practice in our own district, and use the county tax collector. Thank you.
If there are no further board comments on this item, I did have a couple of kind of final comments I wanted to make, just to make sure the board was aware of kind of what was going on with our current collections processes. But I'll wait to see if there are any other board questions or comments first.
Do we have any further? I'm going to turn it back to staff. Thank you.
So one thing we also discussed during our series of workshops last fall is that once we receive the state arrearage funding, we would resume our normal collections processes. Those have been essentially all put on hold since the beginning of the pandemic. As you heard Ms. Davison allude to, we did just a few weeks ago receive the state arrearage funding. We received approximately $900,000, which has now been applied to customer accounts. And now that that money's been received and applied, our plan is to begin our normal processes issued with bills issued starting in February.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any other input from the board? All right, well, if another board member will, one of the three, will express an interest in using the property tax statement collection mechanism for overdue bills, I would entertain to put this quickly on an agenda. So thank you.
Well, I would just add to President Weed's comments, and I hope we can solicit a third vote on the board here. As President Weed mentioned, we would have close to 100% collection if it went to onto the tax roll. And we know from our discussions with the finance department at East Bay Mud that they've had an excellent experience using this method. And so we have a lot to learn here, and 100% is a lot better than 20%.
Thank you. All right, well, if there are no further comments on this item, then we can move on to the next, which
Okay.
is the,
Yes, President Weed, item 6.3.2 is a review of our Help on Tap program update, and we are in the midst of a rate process right now. So this is, and I know there's been a fair amount of discussion on this, so we wanted to update the board in terms of our program. So I'll turn it over again to our Director of Finance, Jonathan Wonderlich.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Here with us this evening is Mr. Ethan Birch, our Help on Tap program administrator, and he will go ahead and provide the annual report on the program to the board.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, John. So about once a year, we try to provide an update on the status of the Help on Tap Low Income Rate Assistance Program to the board. We provided an update to Finance Committee, and they requested that we bring this broader update to the rest of the board. So here we are. So I'm going to walk through some history of the program and a brief overview of how things stand today. Present an update option for the program if the board so chooses, and then request board feedback. So to begin with, Help on Tap is an income qualified low income rate assistance program, or LIRA. It currently provides a $35 monthly credit towards the service charge of the bill. Only direct ACWD customers are eligible, which means ACWD account holders, rather than there's about 1,250 accounts as of today, with an annual cost of around $250,000. Help on Tap was established by the board in 2017 with a benefit amount of $15 and an income limit of 200% of the federal poverty level. And then in 2018, 2019, and 2020, the board increased the benefit amount. And in 2020, there was also an update to the income eligibility limits from 200% of the federal poverty level to the greater of 250% of the federal poverty level, or 50% of area median income. And just somewhat what I'll call an informed anecdote. We used to get a lot of applications to the program of people who were sort of right above the income threshold, $3,000, $4,000 above. And when they would be denied, I would have a conversation with them, and typically their response was, "Well, I'm low income. Why don't I qualify for your low income program?" And like I said, anecdotally, but I do review every single application. Since the board changed the income limits to this formula, the number of that situation has dramatically dropped. I deny very, very, very few applicants for being over the income limits anymore. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we modified the program in the following ways. Number one is we stopped removing participants from the program rolls for lack of recertification. So there's a 2-year enrollment period, and then applicants are required to recertify, which looks a lot like the initial application. Proof of job loss also became something that we accept in lieu of other forms of income verification. So, historically, we did not solicit proof of job loss as an income proof method, and that's something we began doing in 2020. Concurrent with the application of state arrearage funding, recertification requirements will be reinstated, and there are currently right around 700 customers past due for recertification. So that process is going to look like, soliciting customers to reapply, notifying them that they are out of date, and doing that over the course of the next few months. As far as some update options, I've provided some information here on current program costs, as well as what the program costs would be if we raised the benefit amount by $5. With the increase in enrollment that I mentioned before, from that 1,218 number to the 1,250 number it is now, that $40 benefit amount total program cost number is a little closer to $300,000, not 288. But it's still well within the established amount of money we have for this program, which is estimated to be about $400,000 in fiscal year 21-22. Just some other sort of housekeeping items. We don't have an estimated date for the arrival of the AB 401 statewide LIRA program. They've released some reports and there's been some discussions, but there's no hard date, nor is there a firm idea of what that program will even look like. And so I will solicit some feedback from the board now on what other things you might like to hear from us in February, or if you have any comments or questions about the current state of the program, I would be happy to field some questions.
Director Sethi here. One, I would be in favor of increasing the allowance up to $40. Number two, we have more than half of our registered customers in this program that are past the 2-year deadline of what they subscribe to. I would encourage us to consider making that a longer term application, maybe up to 5 years, so that we don't have to be chasing people down every 2 years.
All right. Thank you. Other board members?
I think I can concur with Director Sethi's comments. I'm not sure what the time period would be, but I do kind of agree. I think once you're in this program, a lot of these people, if they're low, particularly if they're in the elderly end and they're just drawing in what they're drawing in, they're probably not getting out of the program financially. If we were to kick it out a little bit longer in time, might be able to save even ourselves some staff time and help the customer in the process. Plus, as far as going up on the dollar amount, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may.
Please.
So I agree with Director Sethi with the increase, $5 increase, and the fact that we really should seriously consider extending the certification period. Like Director Gunther, I do not have a set timeline in mind. I would ask staff to go think about it and perhaps provide some suggestions and some pros and cons. And then I do have another ask. So there's 672 customers now needs to be, quote, recertified. And my guess is a lot of them are mostly seniors and not as well versed in filling out forms. To extent possible, I would ask our staff to provide additional assistance just to make sure that, to make it easier on them to recertify. Our goal is to help them. That's just not get them stuck on paperwork. Thank you.
All right.
And I'll just echo the same sentiments that I would be in favor of both of the proposals from Director Sethi.
I would, I would support Director Sethi's suggestions on this program. I had actually been ironically the vote to increase the dollar amount of monthly or every 2 months stipend. However, we would greatly reduce the demand for this program if we put the service charge on the property tax bill. That would require 4 votes, as opposed to a collection where we can do both the commodity and the service charge. And it would greatly reduce the administrative cost involved. It'd be a much better way to do the public's business. So again, it's an interesting project, but ironically one that we don't need if we'd had a more rational rate structure and collection process, billing process. So thank you, and thank you for the staff report.
All right, well, we definitely appreciate the feedback that's been provided, and we will be back in February with an action item for the board based on what we've heard tonight.
Thank you. I have next items, item 7.0, director's comments, reports on meetings attendance, and agenda item request. The first is,
President Weed, I think we might have skipped the general manager's reports.
I'm
item.
sorry, you're right. I slipped right by that, 6.4, which is the drought update. Trying to get through here and be too efficient. Thank you, Director Akbar.
I appreciate it. I know it's easy to skip sometimes, but we do have actually 3 general managers reports this evening, and we'll start off with an update on the drought. Believe it or not, even though it's been raining over the last few weeks, we are still in a drought. And so I will turn it over to our Director of Water Resources, Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Tonight, I'll be sharing just a short drought update focusing on water supply conditions and outlook. So next slide, please. So drought is continuing to persist throughout the state, with most areas continuing to be in at least a severe drought condition. The graphic on the left that you see from the U.S. Drought Monitor is actually from last week and shows our area in a red extreme drought condition. Although I should note an updated map was published just this morning, so we didn't have a chance to get it in the board packet. But it does show most of the red areas reduced to orange or severe drought condition. I would note there have been some water supply and storage improvements due to the rain and snow that the state received in December. But you can see in the graphic on the right that a number of the reservoirs in the state still remain below the red lines that indicate the historical averages for this time of year. Lake Oroville, which we rely on for state water project deliveries, is now at 75% of historical average for the date, which is an improvement from last month, which we reported at 59% in December. So overall, though, there's still a long way to go to recover from the past 2 critically dry years that we've experienced. Next slide, please.
Can I go quickly on back on that last slide? I had an opportunity to look at the drought report that was published for the state today. The red has been removed from the state of California. It is now severe and below. You have a January 6th report here that was last week. We're now up to 78, and we're going up 1% or 2 every day or 2, 1% every other day at Oroville. We'll soon be, and water hydrologic power at Oroville has been restored. We're seeing equivalent raise in Shasta from the federal side, now at over 50% of historical average. So it's improving, and San Francisco turned in an extraordinary report showing their water supply is within their normal bounds for this, even though they have not yet to make a board action on addressing the drought emergency. So things are looking up. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weed. Next slide, please. And I'll keep moving on here. So I do have some updates from our imported supplies. The State Water Resources Control Board curtailments have remained temporarily suspended, although the possibility that they could be reinstated persists. And just as a reminder, those curtailments could impact either our San Francisco PUC supplies or our State Water Project supplies. Another update is that the Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation have filed a temporary urgency change petition with the State Water Board to allow for changes to operational requirements from February through April, with the goal to manage upstream reservoirs to conserve the storage for fish and wildlife protection, maintaining salinity control in the Delta, and also providing critical water supply needs. And this is something that will be discussed and is on the agenda for the January 19th and 20th State Water Board meeting. Additionally, Department of Water Resources did resume Hyatt Power Plant operations, as Director Weed mentioned, stealing the thunder here at Oroville Reservoir on January 4th. And the SFPUC remains in a declared water shortage emergency and will begin tracking monthly usage to meet 10% voluntary reductions. So staff is preparing for this new reporting procedure. And at this point, San Francisco hasn't given us any indication that they plan to repeal their emergency. They do have additional storage, and that's great news. But given the variety of different constraints and the uncertainty moving ahead, including around curtailments, the emergency does remain in place and we are still being asked to meet the reduction goal.
I can make a quick comment. San Francisco's report, which I shared with staff yesterday, shows a record snow pack in their critical snowpack reservoir, well above the top of any historic measure. So I would expect San Francisco to revisit their emergency declaration shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could go to the next slide, please. So locally, we've received 5.94 inches of rainfall in December. And so far in January, we've actually received an additional 0.12 of an inch. So that brings us actually to 11.4 inches to date with the recent rain for the entire water year since October 1st. Groundwater levels have improved to near the same levels as this time last year. So these are all good things, but at the same time, we do still remain in drought conditions. Next slide, please. And here's part of why I keep repeating that we're still in the drought conditions and we're not out of the woods yet. So this is the seasonal precipitation outlook for January through March. And you can see for our area, it shows on the left that we have equal chances of above or below normal precipitation for this period. And the 1 month outlook for January shows similarly equal chances of above or below normal precipitation for the segment of California that's most relevant to our water supplies. So we're really hoping to be above normal, but so far with so little rainfall in January to date, and being that we're halfway through the month, we may not achieve the 3.5 inches or so that we get on average in January. And last year we did get a bulk of the rain that we received in January with around 3.3 inches as well. So the 10 to 14 day precipitation outlooks, which go at this point out to about January 26th, show increased probabilities for below normal precipitation. So typically we get the majority of our precipitation in the state between December and February. So we had a great December. January is not looking so good right now. So that's part of why we're still cautious in looking at what lies ahead. Next slide, please. And just a brief update on water demands. You can see our overall water demands for the year here with the final 2021 demands shown in the red line, as well as the 2020 pattern in the orange line. The purple dashed line shows the approximate target each month that we've been working toward to achieve an overall 15% reduction. And the gray line shows the 2015 demand pattern during the last drought. In December, we achieved a 13.1% reduction as compared to 2020, right about at our target, as you can see on the right side of the graph. You don't yet see a line on here for 2020 demands, but so far we are on track to meet our January target as well along that purple dashed line. So we'll report out on that next month. Next slide, please. So in summary, despite the healthy precipitation starting the water year, statewide and local water deficits and water shortage conditions do still remain. And with a dry January and uncertainty in the months ahead, staff will continue to closely monitor conditions. We are continuing to promote actions to achieve our 15% system-wide water use reduction target under our emergency ordinance, as well as closely monitoring statewide drought activities. We anticipate updating our planning assessments as the water year progresses and as warranted by any critical developments at the state or with our imported supplies as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Do we have questions from members of the board? When might we hear from the state of California on their allotments from the by DWR, particularly as the snowpack is taken into account?
Good question. And we do get updates on those numbers monthly. And I anticipate later in the month we may hear more from them about any updates. They are watching the rain and snow obviously come in, but with conditions in the Delta and excuse me, all the various water needs around the state. They are taking a close look at balancing all those things. And we hope to hear more toward the end of the month about what they may or may not be able to allocate.
All right. I would note that particularly over the Christmas holiday, that the operation of Del Valle Reservoir experienced a unique and historic change, with the Corps of Engineers allowing a minor modification. We were able to operate with 18,000 acre-feet of additional storage. We were able to handle significant releases without damaging downstream. The equivalent of 18,000 acre-feet of storage, rather than dropping it to 25,000 acre-feet in this time of year, they operated at 43,000 at its peak and managed it very well. To put that into context, we split that 18,000 acre-feet with zone 7. That's 9,000 acre-feet. We're about to spend $100 million to get 9,000 acre-feet of dedicated storage at Los Vaqueros in 10 to 15 years from now. We achieved that at no capital cost by merely changing some administrative regulations and operational criteria. Now, there's some real opportunities out there. A drought is a wonderful thing. It has shown that it can produce some elements. But once again, the board has made some financial decisions based, I think, on some faulty and unfortunately overly restrictive operational criteria that we've shown do not need to be there. I encourage you to revisit some of your past decisions and take a sharp look, not only at the current event, but how we've been able to operate and respond to our water supply requirements, particularly at Del Valle. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Reed, for bringing up Del Valle. And I just will note, we've just provided a short update today, but we do plan on bringing to committee a more thorough update this month, and we'll include some more information about Del Valle as well.
Thank you. Any other? All right.
Director Sethi here. Laura, Ms. Heides, this was a nice update. I'm looking forward to next month's update to see how things are. And I was going to suggest that maybe we come up with an ACWD staff rain dance that we can post on YouTube or something to our website. Our own special rain dance. Let's get people being a little creative.
We'll claim to have tribal rights with the environmental community.
We do have some very creative people here at ACWD. Maybe you've inspired some. We'll see what comes out of that.
Thank you. So if that is you said there were 3 reports. Does that cover?
That's correct, President Weed. The next report is a brief update on COVID-19 for item 6.4.2. And this is customary. We bring this to the board every month. There's an awful lot going on right now, as you all know, in the community around us. And certainly the Omicron variant has arrived at ACWD, and we've had a number of additional positive cases here at ACWD amongst our staff. Just to recap, we've had a total of 47 cases of COVID-19 since the very beginning of the pandemic back in March of 2020. And 19 of those have occurred since the middle of December, since my last report to the board. There really have been only minor impacts to operations as a result. There's been no significant impacts to our operations. However, it's a fair impact to our employees. Our vaccination rate continues to slowly increase. We're at about 83% currently. And also I'll note, as you probably know, that the Alameda County Health Department has recently released some updated guidance based upon the CDC and state guidance related to isolation and quarantine and so forth. And so we're in the process right now of updating our protocols in accordance with that. We are remaining a bit on the conservative side with regard to our own internal protocols based upon those guidelines. And we're trying to ensure that we have the ability to adjust in the event that operational needs dictate. But we're in the process of some transition right now. So we continue with most office staff continuing to work from home, and for those who work on site, there are some additional requirements in place with regard to outdoor masking and so forth, in accordance with the requirements that are in place now. And we continue with weekly mandatory testing for those who are not fully vaccinated. The good news is that the cases that we've had have been generally mild, sometimes with no symptoms at all, but is obviously something that we are watching very, very closely, and we will continue to be vigilant and prioritize employee safety at ACWD. With that in mind, as we continue to watch emerging guidance and keep tabs on what's happening around us, we're not planning on any sort of general re-officing of those work from home staff or significant changes in protocols, probably for several weeks, maybe not, at least until March. But again, we continue to watch and adjust. With that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them. Otherwise, we can move on to our final GM report.
Do we have comments or questions from members of the board? Let me throw in a couple then. I sat in on a Alameda County Special Districts Association meeting on Wednesday morning. They had a presentation detail by Dr. Moss, who's the Alameda County Health Officer. The comment he made startled me, and I left a call and later found the newspaper article where they're now allowing hospitals to allow infected healthcare workers to work in the hospital under certain restrictions because of the emergency status. And it struck me that we should be investigating our ability to operate under different standards if we do in fact encounter an emergency and we need the personnel on duty. It would be a dual step. One, you have an emergency, and second, some criteria of how you operate with employees. The second area where there's been a lot of work and changes and opportunities is in testing. And it would be interesting to get a report on what our testing protocols are, what our options are, and what the cost and how we might be able to reduce those costs and still get a better response, so that we know individuals who might have COVID, and particularly the current variant where they can be reinfected more readily, and certainly carry even though they are asymptomatic, carry the virus to others in their own family. So both the testing protocols and procedures, as well as what we can do in an emergency situation, I think are worthy of additional review.
Sure, and just briefly, the latest guidelines from the Alameda County Health Department do provide for, well, I would say they're not quite as clear as perhaps prior orders have been. There is some flexibility, and as mentioned, we're kind of leaning toward the conservative side with the ability to adjust in terms of isolation and quarantine. As you point out, those orders provide special, I guess, treatment or provisions related to healthcare settings and jails and prisons and so forth. But so we're reviewing that closely. With regard to cost of COVID testing, we have moved to a different testing provider, and at this point, there's very, very low costs associated with the testing program. The cost of the testing services and so forth are all covered by insurance.
Thank you. Okay, so that completes the general manager reports.
One more, President Sethi, we have a quick report by our Director of Finance, John Wunderlich.
Yeah, just a reminder for the board that next Thursday at 6 p.m. there will be a virtual community meeting on our rates proposal that was distributed to all customers back in late December via Prop 218 notice. Staff is working from an assumption that 3 or more board members may end up attending that virtual community meeting. So we do plan to notice it as a board meeting, just so we're prepared just in case.
Thank you. And let me make one possible clarification on the drought monitor for the state. I mentioned red had been removed. There were 5 colors, the 2 most serious levels of drought, exceptional and extreme, have been removed from the state. We may still have severe, moderate, and in places in the state when the red is severe. But earlier this year we had a lot of dark purple and darker colors. Thank you. All right. Next is director comments and reports on meetings attended, agenda item request. First, Director Sethi on the Los Vaqueros Reservoir JPA and your current honors.
Yes. So I'm going to give a report on the December 8th meeting as well as the meeting that we had yesterday. Mr. Wunderlich is my alternate on the JPA board authority. And these have actually been fairly lengthy meetings, like a standard water board meeting. There's a lot of moving parts right now as they're setting up the JPA operationally to be functional and getting ourselves squared away with the Secretary of State and all these filing requirements that we have. So it's been quite an effort. And I would like to inform the board that one of the items on the agenda yesterday was the authority's board of directors elect or appoint by motion the authority's treasurer, which could be a director or another person. And I was informed last week that of the desire of the board to appoint me as the treasurer for the JPA. This comes with a very big leash attached to my neck, but I will read you the a portion of what turned out to be a unanimous 8-0 vote in support of me being the treasurer. The treasurer is to be the depository and have custody of all money of the authority and have other duties as specified in the Joint Exercise of Powers Act. The treasurer is to manage the authority's billing, cash management, financial reporting, and debt, engage the independent auditor to review the authority's financial statements, and report to the administrator or executive director. And part of the cash management responsibilities include monthly financial reporting to member agencies, invoicing, quarterly financial reports to the California Water Commission and Bureau of Reclamation, and engagement of an independent auditor. And there's some other functions here too, but it's quite a responsibility and an honor. I was not expecting this. I didn't seek it out. But in talking to the other board members that are on this 8-member board, there was, I guess, a consensus that I would be appropriate for this role. So it's a little bit daunting. I'm going to have quite a bit of support from Mr. Wunderlich on this and from the finance staff at CCWD. We are meeting on a monthly basis. We have quite a calendar set out for the year, pretty detailed by month. Right now it's in the board packet if anybody wants to look it up. As a separate topic, and Director or President Weed was touching on this. Even though I'm representing ACWD on this board, I do have a concern where the board has been making repeated requests for some kind of return on investment analysis as to our investment and what we're getting out of LVE. And I'm hoping that at some point near term, that will be forthcoming from the staff. That is a request. Mr. Wunderlich, do you have anything to add to the LVR JPA meetings?
Yeah, no, I think that covers it. And, the treasurer is a big assignment. So I know everyone appreciates you taking that on. I do think they're getting close, and hopefully pretty soon we'll start appointing some committees of the JPA as well.
If I could ask a question of Director Sethi. The decision, do not the individual members still have the opportunity to determine if they wish to participate in the entire project, the pipeline only, or the pipeline with the operational storage? And those costs, have any of those operational costs for each of the three options been developed?
Not to my knowledge yet, although there has been discussion of off-ramps. But I think Mr. Wunderlich would be more knowledgeable about that.
May I suggest that the off-ramp disappears once you sign the document, now scheduled for as early as June of this year?
I'm not aware of anything scheduled for June of this year that would prevent off-ramps. I think what we're mostly looking at is kind of a firm commitment to the project is when we sign what's being referred to as a service agreement. And the current timeline on developing those service agreements is that I think if everything goes well, we're still probably 12 months away from presenting a final service agreement to the board. And certainly we would come have multiple presentations to the board in advance of asking for approval for that, including the detailed cost benefit analysis Director Sethi, I know, has asked for multiple times.
Oh, that's great. I recall in a slide that showed the hope that they'd have the services agreements as early as mid-year, but great. It's to the end of the year, all the better. Thank you.
All right, on item 7.2, I don't have much to report here. It was mostly an organizational meeting to look at the calendar on engineering presentations for the next year and solicit input from members. We did have the largest group ever assembled for the South Bay Engineers Club. It was close to 60 people. And we did discuss the scholarship fund, where they award a scholarship every year, or a set of scholarships in the Tri-City and the Tri-Valley area. I requested that we consider putting in $250 toward that scholarship fund, and with the concurrence of President Weed, I think we may be moving forward with that. So that's good news. And I also wanted to alert anyone who might be interested that there is no meeting for January, but in February, we have an annual presentation from an attorney on the updates to the California Subdivision Map Act. And that is always very interesting. And he has some really nice handout materials available too. And so anyone in engineering in particular that works with these kind of land use issues in conjunction with our three cities, it's always helpful to get that annual update. So I would encourage employees to attend if they're interested. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. If there's no other items before the board, we can next go into a closed session.
And President Weed, I'd be happy to provide the report to bring us into closed session if you like.
Please.
Sure. It's now 9:02 and the board is going to convene into closed session for two items. 8.1 is pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators, Ed Stevenson, Jennifer Solito, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Stacy Q, employee organization, ACWD Operators Association. The second closed session, item 8.2, is pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection D2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one potential case. We can now convene into closed session.
All right, thank you. The controller of the session, do we need to leave and come back in, or we can just join? All right, thank you. I was put on mute, so I'm unmuted. I don't know if that happened to every one of us, I believe. So if you wish to speak, each of the board members needs to check the computer. So we can go back now to open session and refer to the district attorney.
Great, thank you. It's now 9:32 and the board convened in closed session for two items. Item 8.1 pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency, excuse me, just one second. Agency designated negotiators, Ed Stevenson, Jennifer Solito, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Stacy Q, employee organization, ACWD Operators Association, and in the closed session, the board heard a report from the agency designated negotiators. For item 8.2, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection D2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one potential case, and in the closed session, no action was taken. And that concludes the open session reports from the closed session.
Thank you. With that, do we have any other item before the board?
We have a 9.1, President Weed, and Ms. Solito will be happy to report on that.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. Item 9.1 is consideration of amendments to the Memorandum of Understanding, or the MOU, between the Alameda County Water District and the ACWD Operators Association. On July 8th, 2021, the board approved the terms and conditions of a successor MOU between the district and the ACWD Operators Association, which we also refer to as the OA, following the successful attainment of a tentative agreement through the bargaining process. On November 17th, 2021, the board approved additional amendments to the new MOU following the conclusion of bargaining with the operating engineers local number 3 and certain terms and conditions, also known as Me Too clauses, which impacted the OA MOU. Subsequently, the OA has approached the district with interest in extending their MOU for another year for a 4-year term, similar to the 4-year term negotiated with the operating engineers local number 3. The board considered these amendments as part of item 8.1 tonight. Staff recommends amending the OA MOU to provide equity with the operating engineers local number 3 and the unrepresented management confidential professional groups in order to provide stability both in labor relations as well as towards financial planning and modeling. The following outlines the proposed amendments to the OA MOU. Extend the term through June 30th, 2025. Provide a COLA in the 4th year of 3.14%, effective the pay period that includes July 1st, 2024, and increase the annual floating holiday allotment by 4 hours. This will provide equity with the amount of floating holiday that was provided to the 2 other employee groups in exchange for the removal of the sick leave bonus provisions. Staff recommends that the board, by motion, adopt these amendments to the OA MOU as outlined, in accordance with the terms and conditions previously approved, and authorize the general manager to amend and execute the MOU accordingly. That concludes my report. I'm happy to field any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from members of the board? Do we have a motion from any members of the board?
I'll move the recommendation.
I'll
Moved by
second.
Director Gunther,
And I'll second.
second by Director Klein. Roll call, please.
Director Sethi,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Plum,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Let us, at this point, we can adjourn the meeting. We'll adjourn it in the memory of BJ Bunting. So,
I greatly appreciate your comments regarding Mr. Buntley, John. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
thank you. All right. Good evening, and thank you for all you've done. And Jennifer, thank you.
For the record, time is 9:36. Thanks very much.